Good afternoon, everyone. I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome to our November meeting of the Academic Council. I hope you all continue to be well. You're almost there. Just another week. It'll be Thanksgiving, so hang in there. I have a few announcements to share before we move on to our agenda items. First, I want to acknowledge the passing of Professor James Cito. Jim, a former chair of this academic council, and a longtime biology professor, died on November the 15th. Jim served as chair of the council from 1994 to 1996 and went on to other administrative roles here at Duke before becoming vice provost for research in 2001 and serving until his retirement in 2014. While serving as chair of the council, he gave then President Nan Cohen a plaque that remained on her desk throughout her presidency. The plaque reads, "Have you consulted the faculty?" We have one of those plaques in the Academic Council office still, and it resides on our conference table where ECAC meets weekly during normal times. Our deepest condolences to Jim's family, and may his memory be for a blessing. There will be no Academic Council meeting on December the 3rd. The December meeting is typically a light meeting as it follows just 2 weeks after the November meeting. Since there are no pressing items for discussion or anything that requires our approval before the Board of Trustees meeting in December, ECAC and I decided we would cancel this meeting and give us all a much needed break. So no meeting December the 3rd. Next, I'm pleased to share the names of the students selected to receive the Academic Council's Faculty Scholars Award. As you know, the Faculty Scholars Award is the highest award given by the faculty to undergraduate students. The selection committee completed its work and its interviews on November the 13th and selected 3 recipients for this award, all from the class of 2021. The recipients are Ciandra Ellison, a psychology major who intends to pursue a joint JD PhD degree so she can continue to develop her current scholarship within Black Studies while learning more about law and social order. Jamal Burns, a history major, the concentration in business and economic cultures. Jamal's future academic plans include obtaining a PhD in history. And Zhao Chen Du, a chemistry and computer science major who intends to pursue graduate studies at MIT. Please join me in congratulating each of our scholars for earning this very high honor. And thanks also to our colleagues on the Faculty Scholars Committee for their good work. My next announcement is about another committee that is hard at work. The nominating committee for the next chair of the Academic Council started its work a couple of weeks ago. You see my smile? This is a 5-person committee appointed by ECAC that is working to secure 2 candidates to stand for election for chair of this body. And it's a wonderful position, great experience. And I'm sure the committee will bring us 2 excellent choices. My term will end June 2021, and our bylaws state that the next chair should be elected and announced by our February council meeting, and they take office effective July 1. The 5 members of the nominating committee are Victoria Szabo from Art History and Visual Studies. Victoria is an immediate past member of ECAC and a vice chair of ECAC, and she is serving as chair of the nominating committee. Thea Porter-Young from the Divinity School. Thea is currently an alternate academic council representative. Joseph Winters from Religion and African American Studies. Joe is the current member of the council. Claudia Gunch from Civil and Environmental Engineering in the Pratt School. Claudia is a former member of ECAC, a current member of the Academic Council, and is an associate vice provost in the Office of Faculty Advancement. And finally, Manoj Mohanan from the Sanford School. Manoj is a current member of ECAC. As I mentioned, the committee will bring forth 2 names to our January 21st council meeting, and our election will take place shortly thereafter via Qualtrics. Only current members of the council are eligible to vote for the chair. So look out for that come January. All faculty should have received just a few minutes ago, an email from Allison Duncan from the Board of Trustees inviting faculty to participate in the review of President Price. Following past practice, the Board of Trustees has initiated a review of the performance of President Price, who is in his 4th year of his initial 5-year term. So please read that email and take an opportunity to send whatever comments you have to the review committee. In addition to trustees and 2 student reps, there are 4 faculty on the review committee. And those faculty are James Coleman from the law school, Ted Pappas from the School of Medicine, Charlotte Sussman from Arts and Sciences, and Don Taylor from the Sanford School. And Don, as you know, is the former chair of the council. ECAC worked with the trustees to select these faculty representatives. Also last fall, ECAC met with board chair Jack Bovender to discuss the goals and the procedures for the review. So the faculty's been involved in this from the beginning. The review committee welcomes and encourages feedback from all members of the community. The deadline for feedback is December the 18th, December the 18th. Moving right along, our next item of business is to approve the minutes from our October the 15th meeting. The minutes were posted with our agenda on our Sakai site. Are there any corrections or questions regarding the minutes? Hearing or seeing none, we will consider these approved. The next item on the agenda is an item we took up in our October meeting, and this is the approval of consideration for approval of some changes to Duke's data policy. The document that was provided in advance of the presentation by Vice President Larry Karen at last month's meeting was posted again for today's meeting. But before we vote, Larry is here to address some questions and suggestions that we received from our council colleagues from the School of Nursing. Those were shared with Larry, and he agreed to address those before the vote. Larry?
Okay. Okay, so everybody should see my screen. These are the questions, and these came, as Carrie said, from the School of Nursing. So I'm going to try to go through these quickly, but they're important questions, so happy to discuss as much as anybody wishes to. So there were 4 questions that I have bulleted here. So remember, the policy is about the possible licensing of data from Duke Health. And so the first bullet concerns that there should be full transparency to possible participants about the possibility that their data may be licensed, and we agree with that. Colleen Shannon, who works in the health system and is responsible for the security of health data, is currently working through the process of that, but we completely agree with that bullet, and we intend to do exactly as stated there. The second bullet concerns the potential to use revenue from the sale or the licensing of Duke Health data to support the community. And we agree with that as well. We've talked about that in our group. I'm going to remind you of the people who are implementing this policy in a moment, so you can see who they are. I'll remind you. We agree with that. That we do not believe there's a necessity for a 4th category for the community, because remember, a substantial fraction of the revenue will go to Duke University and to the Duke University Health System. And how those resources are used is to be determined, but supporting the community is certainly something that people support. Third bullet, with regard to the development of the policy, there was the thought that we should have had, I guess, a third party or a non-Duke person be a part of the process of developing the policy, as well as that person should have some expertise in bioethics. We actually did that. We had outside counsel who helped us develop this policy with that expertise. And then finally, a reviewer should be familiar with the NIH Open Science Initiative, Adrian Hernandez is the co-chair of this process, and Adrian is very much involved in the NIH Open Science Initiative. I can point to some things, detail that, and then, all right, so anyway, last bullet. The recommendation that members of the patient community should be part of the implementation of the policy. We don't disagree with that either. That's not explicitly in the policy, but that's something we can certainly do. Let me just remind you of the people who are executing on this policy. So, and also these people participated in drafting the policy. So Jeff Ferrani is the Chief Information Officer in Duke Health, and Adrian Hernandez is a Vice Dean in the School of Medicine. He's also the Executive Director of DCRI. They're the two chairs of this committee. And then I won't list all the names, but I purposely put the titles of some of them so that you can see, you know, what they do. So Colleen Shannon is the Chief Privacy Officer in Duke Health. So all she does is worry about about the patient's privacy. So now one thing that I talked to Jeff Ferrani after getting these questions from the School of Nursing. And so I will say that there is a belief we should add somebody from the School of Nursing to this committee, and we will do that. Secondly, the recommendation about adding somebody from the community, we agree with that as well, so we can pursue that. And then finally, there was a recommendation of possibly adding somebody with some expertise in bioethics. No argument with that as well either. Those are details about the execution of the policy. So let me just stop and see if there's anything else.
Any other questions for Larry?
I'm happy to speak on behalf of the School of Nursing simply because I put these notes together after talking to our community about what was happening and what we were hearing here and making sure that we were representing our entire school. So I very much appreciate the time and effort that you have taken in responding to our concerns. I think it's just important to contextualize for the rest of the council the piece that we wrote before these 4 bullet points, which is that if you scroll up just a little bit, the reason we're asking for this caution really just has to do with the fact that many of the participants will come from communities that aren't setting these agendas and aren't setting the questions that are going to be asked with this data. And we want to be sure that this is done as fairly as possible. So I just thought that that context might be important for those who were only seeing the bullets, but we appreciate your time and attention to all of our concerns.
Yes, Anne-Marie, thank you. And you're quite right about that first paragraph, the importance of it. We agree. And we really felt that way all along, but it's good to be reminded of that. Okay, so I'll stop sharing unless people. Okay.
Additional questions for Larry? Thank you, Larry. It looks like we're ready to vote. The question has been called and seconded. So we'll proceed as follows with the vote. If you wish to vote no or to abstain, please send a private chat to Sandra Walton so stating. If you vote no, if you choose to vote no or to abstain, please send a private chat to Sandra Walton so stating. If we don't receive a no or abstention vote from you, yes will be recorded and counted as your vote. So no or abstentions to Sandra Walton via chat. If we don't receive that, your vote will be counted as a yes for the record. And I will announce the results before we adjourn. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Anne-Marie, and our colleagues from the School of Nursing for raising some important questions. And Larry, thank you for being attentive to those. Next, I want to welcome to the screen President Price to talk more about the recently announced anti-racism initiatives at Duke. He touched on this last month at our meeting, but ECAC and I thought it was important for him to come before us and to give us some more details so that we can hear more and learn more about where we're headed in this space. President Price.
Thank you very much, Carrie, and thanks to all of you here as part of this council meeting for your work throughout the semester. As Carrie said, we're just days away, but I know this has been enormously hard work, and I just want to thank you for that hard work, that adaptability, creativity, and sacrifice over these past 8 months. And I appreciate this opportunity to provide a brief update on our anti-racism and equity efforts. As you know, I sent a message to the community on October 15th, outlining the university-wide commitments and a number of actions that we've taken in this vitally important space. We also launched antiracism.duke.edu as a central repository for what we've been doing and all the work that remains. Now, success in moving forward with these initiatives will depend on sustained, focused efforts across the university. And so we're turning our attention to ensuring that as we implement various actions moving forward, that we have just that, sustained and focused efforts across the university. Vice President for Institutional Equity, Kim Hewitt, and Vice Provost for Faculty Advancement, Abbas Ben-Mamoun, have been leading the way on these efforts. And so I've asked them to give a brief update today. Abbas will discuss the programming and educational activities we're putting together for faculty. Kim will focus on the ongoing work we've undertaken to produce climate assessments, including a survey of staff this spring, as well as plans to develop programs for our staff, and her office's role in coordinating and accepting feedback on the website and guidance around programs intended to increase racial diversity. Her office going forward will be the keeper of that website, antiracism.duke.edu, and more generally responsible for coordination across the university. So looking forward, I foresee 4 principal challenges that we intend to meet. The first has to do with communication. The need to keep the university community informed about our efforts and well informed about the need to move forward. And finally, the extraordinary contributions of our Black students, faculty, staff, and alumni. A second major challenge for us will be coordination across very diverse units and departments across the university. I've been very, very pleased to see a myriad of programs already launched, activities already undertaken, educational programs developed across the university. We need to have a coordination of those efforts across the university. And again, I'm looking to Kim's office for assistance there. A third major challenge and a goal going forward will be data gathering and assessment. It's vital to our transparency intentions. And we are moving forward with both existing data gathering and new assessments, and there's a working group put together to do just that. And finally, accountability throughout the organization. The data that we gather is useful not just to index where we are, and not only to inform the community about where we are, but to hold leaders throughout the organization, throughout the university, accountable for progress. So that's where we are. And let me turn things over now to Kim and Abbas, and then we can take some questions.
Good afternoon. So in light of those objectives that President Price has outlined, I'm just going to start with some guiding questions that Abbas and I have been thinking about as we work towards advancing the anti-racism agenda. And then we're going to focus on some of the accomplishments of the work that we are both doing in our offices and overlapping. So, you know, how do we develop structures around the plan in order to sustain these efforts over time? How do we secure broad-based support and buy-in for these anti-racism efforts? How can we assure accountability at all levels of the institution? And what can we do to make sure our commitments are connected to individual experiences at Duke? So I will now turn it over to Abbas to talk about faculty.
So thanks, Kim. Thanks, everyone. As you know, the mission of our office is focused on faculty at the university and their academic homes. So faculty and their academic programs are our main stakeholders and our efforts are aimed at supporting them. Since our work also overlaps or depends critically on collaboration with other units, some of this work is coordinated with OIE, Kim's office, Duke Research, and the Graduate Education, Learning Innovation, Graduate School, and HR, among many others. Our work is focused on, in my office, faculty advancement. We are focusing on three main intersecting areas. One is diversifying the faculty hiring for inclusive excellence. And the other area is faculty and leadership development. So we recruit faculty, but we need to make sure that we retain them and we support them while they are here so that they can thrive here in an equitable and supportive climate. And the last one is about climate, culture, and community. So these are the three critical areas. But of course, for us to succeed in those areas, we need to make sure that we are responsive to the needs of the academic units and to the faculty, and we need to be transparent and with built-in accountability. So I will share with you some concrete things we are doing or that we are planning. So for example, I'll start with the second one, hiring for inclusive excellence. As you know, we have an initiative in place to hire underrepresented faculty. We are in the 4th year of that program. We are making some progress. It's a long way to go, but I can share with you that, for example, over the last 3 years, we managed to increase the number of Black faculty at the university from around 66, 67 to over 80 now. And that's progress, but again, as you know, in this area, it is slow. So we need to sustain that and continue working on it. And we got some funding from the Duke Endowment to continue that work. So we are working with academic units. While we are doing faculty hiring, we also work with search committees on how to make sure that searches are inclusive. We also have programs in place that you may have seen to support academic leaders. In order for us to support faculty, we need to support their leaders, particularly chairs, DGSs, UGSs, and others. So we have been offering a number of programs and workshops like leading an academic units and at Duke workshop, a series that we offer on a regular basis. And this fall, we started programs with the consortium, the Ivy Plus consortium. So we offered a number of workshops and we'll be developing more programs. These are for all Ivy Plus institutions to support chairs. And also there will be programs for faculty. And the third area is support for faculty. We have a series of workshops in place, and we are also doing some work with the Ivy Plus consortium to support faculty. And the work that we do touches on lots of things. For example, how to deal with difficult situations, how to thrive as a faculty member, how to navigate promotion and tenure, many, many other things. The second area is faculty and leadership development. And here I would like to share with you some good news. My colleague, Associate Vice Provost of Faculty Advancement, Charlene Black, and Professor Sharmir Royal will be leading a new curriculum on anti-racism for faculty. This will be launched in January. I think it's around January 11th to the 14th. An announcement will be sent to you, to all the faculty tomorrow in our newsletter. So we welcome faculty to participate in this in a new curriculum on anti-racism. We are also working on highlighting the work of our faculty and make sure that they are nominated for awards and they get the recognition they deserve. Because one area that we see, for example, you look at APT dossiers, you see that faculty of color, for example, they might not be receiving, invitations to speak as frequently as others. They might not get cited as often. So we need to make sure that we work with them, we support them to elevate their research and get the word out and support them in those efforts. We also, as you know, we launched an initiative for research on race and racism in the American South with support from the Duke Endowment. The other area is the community. So we have been working with schools. As you know, all the schools are working on their plans or have already developed some plans. So we are working with them. We looked at all their plans, we provide them with feedback, and we are meeting with some units to work with them further and see how we can implement those plans. Professor Claudia Gunch in my office is also working in developing toolkits, policies, guidelines, reviewing all those policies and guidelines in academic units to make sure that they are equitable. So we will be seeing more, for example, templates for faculty evaluation, templates for bylaws. These are important things, practices that we have in academic units that you need to make sure that they are equitable, that they are transparent, that they are inclusive. So we are doing that. Another thing that we are doing, for example, on promotion and tenure. We are looking at the guidelines that we give to review committees, to external reviewers, to make sure that they pay attention to the biases that we see sometimes in IPT dossiers, particularly with research by faculty of color or research on underrepresented communities. All these things, of course, need to be transparent and to have built-in accountability. So we are working on developing some review instruments, survey instruments for academic units. This is in collaboration with the OIE that we will be sharing with departments and schools and centers. As President Price mentioned, we launched a website that will be populated also with data on faculty demographics and other data that we have from surveys and others. And all the team in my office and with OIE, we work intensively with academic units to work on issues within those units. For example, with our issues that touch on individuals or groups, to make sure that they are addressed and that they put practices and guidelines in place to deal with them over the long term. So these are some of the things that we are doing in our office. Again, this is work for faculty, so we welcome your inputs about what we are doing, what we are not doing well, that we need to, where we need to improve, what we are not doing that we should be doing. So we very much welcome that from you. And I'll turn it back to Kim.
So in the area of assessment and accountability, President Price mentioned a climate assessment that will include staff. So we've put together a climate assessment steering committee and 2 working groups really to think about how we can create an assessment that will focus on, racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, and be able to be consistent across staff, faculty, and students. And then we have just identify 2 working groups, one that will be focused on developing a tool that we can use to look at, measure ourselves going forward, help us establish a baseline, think about at what level we will be able to extract data to provide to departments. And then the second working group is focused on kind of education and support around the information we will learn for the assessment, so that once we have this information, we also have some deliverables along with it to say, here's what you can do with that data to support the goals in your department or area. And then President Price mentioned our work on the coordination and feedback on the anti-racism website. So right now I've been working with communications. I also just hired a new assistant vice president for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So she accepted yesterday. She starts on January 4th. Her name is Leanne Royster. She's currently the director of the Center for Inclusive Excellence at Elon, and she's been in that role for about 8 years and was the founding director. And has a background in public health, which brings some nice connection to health sciences and the health system. So we'll be working together really on a structure and a plan to think about how we make that website a place where people can go to get information, see themselves in it, understand the changes, and be a real mechanism for accountability. Abbas also mentioned some work with institutional research on developing some dashboards, and OIE is also working with David Jameson Drake to similarly create some dashboards where we can look at staff diversity. And we've been working with units on strategic planning for administrative units and really want to think about how we can do that more consistently and bring more connection with all of the administrative units. And then to kind of fit in with the anti-racism curriculum that will be announced in faculty advancement, together with this new assistant vice president, we hope to launch a curriculum out of OIE in the spring. And also to be thinking in relationship to the climate assessment, how we can better support professional development and advancement for staff, particularly staff of color, kind of based on what we think we may find. This is a conversation that's also happening with the PCOVA staff committee. And then I also have been working to create some guidance. So, a lot of good work is happening, really focused on how to create to increase diversity in certain areas, but we want to be able to do that in a way that isn't problematic in terms of some of our legal limits or challenges. And so we met with the deans last week to kind of talk about that guidance that we'll be distributing. And then I've just been working with various groups who are doing fellowship programs or other programs to think about creative language to kind of manage any, you know, legal concerns, but also help to accomplish the goals. We've been hosting regular meetings of the D&I Leaders Group, and in those meetings we have showcased some individual diversity and inclusion committees and different efforts across the university. And similarly, last week we had an OIE breakfast, and we showcased 3 kind of local efforts around diversity and inclusion, as well as having a panel discussion. And from those last 2 kind of things that I mentioned, really are finding that there's a lot of interest in just hearing what people are doing in a way to inspire others. And so we're going to be thinking about more ways to feature units and areas that are doing creative things to support the anti-racism agenda as a way to inform and support and just support this kind of grassroots efforts that are happening at the university. So with that, we will turn now to questions.
There's a question from Laura Lieber.
Hi, I just typed it into the chat. I was just wondering if you could articulate how your work coordinates with the anti-racism committees and task forces that all the different schools have set up, as well as I know there's the Committee on Campus Climate. I feel like there are a lot of committees going on. I'm just wondering if this is the clearinghouse for them or how they're being coordinated.
So in terms of the anti-racism plans that were generated by the schools, so really Abbas's office together with me, we looked at those collectively to provide some feedback to the provost to then provide to the deans. In terms of other, that's one of the challenges, I think, of a very diverse community. There's a lot of efforts happening around the university. And so not every anti-racism committee necessarily is coordinated in this effort. And so that's one of the things I think we want to move more towards, to be able to kind of provide, to provide a menu of ways to support these different efforts that are happening on the ground.
Yeah, and I would just add to that some of us, some committees have reached out to us, some schools have reached out to us, for example, to meet with them, and we have done that, to talk with them about their plans, about their vision, and what they are working on. So, for example, I know that Sherlyn Black in our office has been working closely with some units. I have done the same thing, and I know that Kim has been doing that as well.
Laura, I would also say it is our intention to both coordinate activities to the extent that we can, but also to serve as a clearinghouse. And one of the frustrations, of course, in a large institution with so much happening is that it's difficult to know where to go for that information. So we'll be using the anti-racism website as a clearinghouse for activities and programs as those are developed. That's our intention. And the new AVP in Kim's office will be, I think, a big assist to those efforts.
Hi, this is Nicole Lear here at School of Medicine. The programming, the anti-racism program in January, is that open to all faculty members in particular, including School of Medicine? And I guess it's along some of the similar lines of the last question. Are there going to be individual schools anti-racism programming for faculty, or how is that working?
So if you're talking about the curriculum I mentioned for faculty in January, that would, that's what, I don't know whether Sherlyn is on the call, but maybe she can talk more about it. But this is open to all faculty from Duke.
I can just
say, go
really,
ahead, Sherlyn.
Yeah, it's open to all faculty, and Charmaine and I are collaborating on this. The idea is that it's going to sort of be a 2-part curriculum, where one aspect of it will be about the practical skills that are required to become anti-racist in your practices as a faculty member. The second piece will be more about the historical structures and policies that have led to some of the racism issues that we've had. And so The two will be coordinated, and at the end of it, the faculty who complete both components will get a certification at the end.
Okay, thank you.
Chris Shreve.
Hi, thank you. I was just wondering, you mentioned the inclusion of staff in the steering committee. I was wondering if those staff would be drawn from all levels, including groups of historically underrepresented minorities at Duke, like the housekeepers and the bus drivers groups.
So the idea, yes, is that, and we actually had talked about that in our PCOBA committee, that we want to really think about how we can access all staff, even those who perhaps don't use email or aren't, typically engaged with the university in that way. But the plan is to be able to incorporate all staff in the climate assessment. And then be able to look across staff, faculty, and students and demographic groups to understand the experiences of people at the university.
Other questions? So thank you, Vince, Kim, and Abbas for this update. Very helpful and very informative. And I'm sure you'll be hearing from folk from time to time as you continue in this work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the next item on our agenda is to have an update about the upcoming spring semester from Vice President Cal Cavanaugh and Executive Vice Provost Jennifer Francis. Before I turn the floor over to them, let me first congratulate them and the entire team for the successes that we've had in the fall semester. It's been a tremendous success. And let's keep our fingers crossed. Again, one more week. Let's hold on until the next week and hope we leave healthy and come back healthy. Cal and Jennifer.
Carrie, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're doing as well as you can. We're going to try to roll through this pretty quickly, where Jennifer and I will kind of lay the foundation, and then I want to publicly also extend my thanks to Steve Haas and Tom Denny, who will follow us, who have been attached to my hips through the last 6 months at least. This first slide is just a level set. This organizational structure has really grown organically over the last 5 months. And I want to run through this very quickly because it sets the stage for the spring as well. I want to highlight on the right side of this, the modeling team is one that Steve is heading up, and we'll talk about that. That has been an invaluable component to our efforts throughout the semester and has had some very unique data and real-time adjustments that has allowed us to kind of focus our efforts. Behind each of these boxes are literally dozens of people who have worked tirelessly through the semester to bring us to the point that we are at. I want to highlight just a couple pieces in here. When we look at our testing components, we're very, very fortunate to not only have the Vaccine Institute connected to us, but also ongoing access to the way that we've set up our symptomatic testing as well as our asymptomatic testing. In the surveillance space, I will show you in just a minute how we have structured that. And we believe that that structure has really led to the success that we've had to date. For example, every single week when our students are being tested once, in some cases twice per week, that compliance is nearly 99% of those students showing up on a regular basis. A lot of that is because of the data management, the operations, and we'll have Tom kind of wrap up on some of the lab operations. Thanks to our work in the technology space, especially with Tracy Futhy's team, the symptom monitoring app, and the unique aspect here for Duke is when someone does express a symptom, there's actually medical follow-up, whether that's a student, a faculty, or a staff member. I want to jump over and give a shout out to Mary Pat and her team, especially a young man by the name of Chris Rossi, who joined us during the summer in the isolation and quarantine activity. This has also been a key ingredient in terms of keeping us very, very safe. The last two things I want to mention here is in the contact tracing and also our interface with Durham Public Health. That has not been the case nationally around the other universities that you've seen. We have very strong relationships with the county, and our contact tracing has been incredibly robust. Okay, Steve, if we can move to the next one. This next slide is just going to simply show you the structure that we've had in place as it relates to the site managements for our surveillance testing throughout the semester. We actually had 15 sites, and we actually even created a mobile testing van to actually help with some of our off-site testing. We've had about 30 FTEs deployed to do this. This will be in place again, starting in, not that we're counting, but 46 days when we start up again for the spring. Okay, I wanted to move to the next one, Steve, and we're going to just move through very quick some data elements that I thought the council, Carrie, might be interested. This is data going in through last weekend through the beginning of August. We've now been north of 166,000 tests that have been completed. Through the 17th of this month, we've had 142 student cases, 78 positive cases. I will tell you that all of those, except for now approximately 20, have moved through their disease state in terms of full recovery. So we're very excited about that. A little bit of a highlight and a breakdown here. Steve, we can move to the next one. Of those just in the student world, when we look at that 142, 98 of those were undergraduates, 44 of those graduates. Of the undergraduates, the majority of those were off campus. When you take a look at the level of virus that we had on the campus through the fall, it was actually quite small, of only having 41. I should also say that Steve will highlight is we are not aware, and we're talking to all of our AAU peers, our Ivy Plus peers, certainly schools around the state. We've not had a single incident of classroom transmission that's been identified. Okay, Steve. If we look at where the off-campus and we look at the breakdown of that 101, you'll see that the majority of those were undergraduates. We only had through the semester, knock on wood, only one cluster. I think it was a very strong win in terms of how it was handled. I'll ask Steve to kind of highlight some of the work that went on there, okay? As we're looking at wrapping up the last couple of days here for this semester, we're continuing the surveillance testing through the end of this week, and then different than we've done through the semester as we're having students get ready to leave, that we will continue surveillance testing on Saturday and Sunday of this upcoming weekend, and then we'll wrap up on Monday as well. As you well know, we will have a good cohort of students that will continue to be here, especially our graduate students in laboratories on the other side of Thanksgiving. So we will pick up surveillance testing starting on the 30th, and we will do that twice a week going through the end of December. We also have had very strong communication and coordination with those students that will be in isolation and quarantine. We expect that we will have some small number of those that will be with us through the Thanksgiving holiday, okay? As we look at January, I'm just going through this very quickly. Some of the learnings that we had from the fall. If you recall, if you were close to this, that we did gateway testing for all of our undergraduate and graduate students coming in, but then we had a little bit of a gap before we started surveillance testing. That gap won't be there, so we'll bookend this. Every graduate student, every undergraduate student will be gateway tested upon arrival, and then we will abut against that the new surveillance testing. We won't have to go through a ramp up period. We have hit a high water stabilization mark of doing about 16,000 tests per week, and that will start up again in January. Okay, Steve, I think this is my last one before I transfer to Jennifer. Here, just a couple of highlights, some concerns we had back in the summer. We've navigated our way through, for example, on some supply chain issues. We will have approximately 120,000 masks that will be delivered here in about 2 weeks. So we'll refresh that distribution for our faculty, our staff, and our students going in here. The last two things that I would just mention here is that we will continue to have robust relationships with Durham County Public Health, and we will plan on really refreshing all of these aspects that we had through the fall, getting ready to go into the spring. With that, I'll transfer over to Jennifer.
Thanks, Kyle. Thank you, Steve. I just wanted to remind people, I'm not going to go through this slide, that these were the factors, just generally speaking, that we were very concerned about from the summer and going into fall. None of those has really left us, except that we've managed to control them to some extent, certainly by the surveillance testing and some other decisions we made, notably to keep students in single rooms as we went through this. So if we could jump to the next slide, Steve. The new things for spring are listed in red on the right. It seems implausible to us that we won't see a higher rate of positive baseline tests in January than we did in August. I think it's definitely fair to say people are quite tired. And so the advances we've made in positive behaviors, we're going to have to be extra encouraging and forceful in getting more of that in spring. As you know, we're going to face colder months for us here in the South. It's generally January and February, and that creates some issues because there will be less events that we can do outside. We certainly benefited a great deal this past fall from pretty warm weather for us, even in fall. And last but not least, there's certainly a lot of external factors that we want to keep in mind. On the green side, I'll just highlight a few things that I think are positives that we've done. I apologize, my dogs are fighting right now. We have some more campus housing than we expected. And so even maintaining single occupancy and a 4-to-1 bathroom ratio, we're going to be able to expand the number of students that we can invite to live on campus. The increased housing does not reduce our quarantine or isolation space, which is good, but it also doesn't increase it. And I'll come back to that a little bit. And as Kyle has mentioned to you, I think our testing procedure are about as efficient and comprehensive as we can be going into spring. Next slide, Steve, thank you. Our plan for spring, as you know from an email that Vincent Price sent out, we have invited those students who are already living in Duke housing to return, and we extended Duke housing to juniors and seniors that wanted it. And we're looking at slightly more undergraduates being able to be back here and on campus. As I mentioned before, this does not affect our quarantine or isolation space. It neither decreases it nor does it increase it, but we have done two things. We've added the JB Duke for the spring term, and we expect that we will have full use of the lodge, otherwise known as the Cambria. We had previously been only using the back part of the lodge and continuing to rent out the first part. We'll transform all of that into usable space. We're certainly looking at non-traditional spaces as well on campus. I wanted to give the Academic Council a quick look at what we're seeing in terms of in-person classes for the spring registration. Steve, if you could click to the next slide. This was done very early on in the registration. It's probably close, except for Fuqua and Law, which are on slightly different calendars and don't necessarily go through this registration system. The main thing I'll point out to folks here is if you look down at the % of in-person classes, particularly for the undergraduate space and the general graduate space, both of those numbers are up to around 20%. That's about 5% higher than it was, 5% being that was around 15% before. It's up to around 20% there. I think most of that, frankly, came out of the hybrid category, where I think faculty realized just how difficult it was to try to do both of these at once, but we're still looking at about 1/3, 35% of our classes being taught either in person or hybrid. As we did for fall, we will be inviting those faculty who are teaching in person or hybrid to participate in testing, and we'll be getting out that information to those faculty very, very soon. Steve, if you could go to the last slide from me. Thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit on, as you know, Kyle and I are working with the 2021 Planning Committee, and we have thought about our contingency planning for spring. The first three parts of the plan, plans A, B, and C, are all predicated in some way, shape, or form on students returning to campus as scheduled in January and having baseline tests. Plan A is that everything proceeds well, such that we can continue as we have planned to start classes on the 20th of January. Plan B has a slight sequester period if those baseline rates seem a bit higher and a little bit less comfortable for us, in which case we would start classes remotely for the first 3 days of the semester and then transition to on-campus classes on Monday, January 24th. Plan C is just a little bit more extreme view of Plan B in terms of if our positive rates are even higher, that we would think about a little bit longer period of sequestering and being remote, about 10 to 14 days, which would be the full if you will, quarantine and isolation period. And Plan D is the one that is much more predicated on what's happening in local, state, regional areas that we will just need to be monitoring and seeing what those rates look like to determine whether there is a scenario that arises that would not have us try to bring the students to campus in January, but rather to start classes remotely. So at that point, I think I'll end, and Carrie, I'll send this back to you for how you want to do the rest of the time.
Okay, we'll see if there are any questions for Kyle or Jennifer. Okay. Great. Thank you, Kyle and Jennifer, for that update. And again, thanks to Vince, you want to?
Oh, Carrie, it looked like Stefan Bath had his hand up.
Okay, Stefan.
Yes. Could you share with us perhaps a preview on your plans how to roll out the vaccination for the entire Duke community, since that will be instrumental for resuming normal campus activities in the summer or fall?
Stefan, I assume you're talking about the COVID vaccination. Yeah, and so I've had the opportunity to sit on a number of the committees in the health system. You may be very aware that this will be coordinated at a federal and a state level. And so there's very close work going on with the state of North Carolina. There is a straw structure of the prioritization of this. As you might imagine, the first priority there are going to be to frontline healthcare workers that are working with positive COVID patients. And then it kind of cascades down from there. There is a distribution process that is being worked out right now, both in terms of the level of positions and exactly how that will be deployed. Honestly, at this point in time, we are not anticipating that there will be sufficient vaccination available during the first 6 months of 21, that it will actually cascade into our faculty, our staff, or our students. But we are starting to turn the attention to both the summer and the fall of 21. So that's where that stands at the moment.
David Schanzer.
Hi, and thank you to everyone. I have two quick questions. The first is a comment in terms of faculty who were teaching in person. I just wanted to say that having access to it seemed like unlimited access to testing was very important and very reassuring to have that available. And I was wondering if that would continue to be available for those faculty who are planning on teaching in person in the spring, if that testing was going to be continued through November, December, and early January. Would we continue to have access to that? And the second question is, do we have any data on mental health visits and things like that for students? Despite all the successes, my interactions with students were generally positive, but it was a pretty grim semester in a lot of ways, despite all of our successes. So I'm just wondering, what do we know about the mental health impacts on students from this semester?
Mary Pat here, if she wants, is that?
Carrie, would you like me to address the testing question first, and then I could ask Mary Pat to address the mental health issue?
That's great, yes.
So David, first, great to see you, and couldn't agree more about the testing component. Yes, first, testing will be available. Certainly the surveillance testing will be available through November 30th and going through the end of December. So if there's a faculty member that's still coming to campus that wanted to continue participating in that surveillance piece, that will be available. So that will continue. We certainly will be making that available through the spring semester. I should also say that later today, we've coordinated with the health system. There will be a communication that goes out to our entire population that if there are folks that wanted to take advantage of clinical testing in advance of the holidays, there will be options to do that. We have some folks that are traveling, and we've been fielding some questions about that. So it's a yes, yes, yes on the testing piece. And then I'd let Mary Pat kind of respond to the mental health question.
Yep. Hi, everybody. Thanks for all everybody's doing on this particular topic in so many ways with supporting students, undergrad and graduate and professional. Our data shows that our CAPS visits are not necessarily up. We have a lot of students that are living off campus, still accessing CAPS, students accessing our remote clinical care that we've added. Effectively, I think we started in the summer. We've had it going for a while, but we don't see huge spikes in use of mental health clinicians. We do see Duke Reach and the acuity of the sort of cases sort of intervening with students in crisis. Some of those related to students having family members impacted by COVID and a lot of disruption. And then more broadly, your sort of other point of the sort of well-being of our students, distinct from any sort of specific diagnosable mental health component. There's lots that we're working on there. We've been partnering with faculty, thinking about ways to broaden everyone's sort of awareness of how our students are doing, how we're all doing, right? And then thinking about sort of continuous opportunities to help students connect, take care of themselves. We can't answer when the pandemic's going to end. We can't answer what to make of it all. And we're trying to really partner with students and student support groups to create a supportive community. I don't know if that's the best answer, but there's a couple different levels there. And I just want to say how much I appreciate all the faculty and the ways that they've been partnering with us to support the students. It's been a team effort for sure.
Thank you. Patrick Charbonneau.
Yeah, the question for Jennifer. First, in the fall, if I remember well, the students who were showing symptoms at home were asked to stay home and delay their arrival to campus. Is the same thing planned in the spring? That's part one. And the second part is, I think that the rate of infection of the baseline was something like 100 times smaller than the community testing in North Carolina. Is that what you call the expected baseline, or what are sort of thresholds for A, B, and C?
I'll try to go the former first. So yeah, I think we will absolutely tell students that if they're showing symptoms, they should wait to come back for that purpose. No question. In terms of the baseline tests, no, I think what we're all thinking is that we are expecting that we're going to see a higher rate than we saw in August, for sure, because of what we're seeing across the country, right? Patrick, your last question is the most difficult because we don't have, if you will, specific positivity rates. I mean, a couple things that we have done that have given us a lot more flexibility and bandwidth in the system is, remember, all of our students that are at least living in Duke housing are in single rooms. So that means we have an immediate way that if we needed to, we could sequester, quarantine quite a few students, okay, very quickly. So frankly, I would say, and Kyle can comment on this, that the two factors that we look at, number one, is our work with the medical center and the health system to understand how they are experiencing and what sort of capacity they are at. That is key and probably number one. And then number two is to look at what our sort of flexibility and capacity is and what we're reserving as isolation and quarantine space. And I'll also add that we have looked into if we need to go beyond the capacity that we have right now, could we pick up some? And we are very confident that we could, should we reach that point. Kyle, do you want to add anything to what I just said?
No, the only thing I would say, it's really a good lead in to Steve. I don't want to steal any of his thunder, but some of the amazing lessons learned that we had, Patrick, during the semester about things that we learned that really allowed us to get to the point that we are now. We're going to apply certainly all of those learnings as we go to the spring.
Thank you.
I have one more question, Don Taylor.
Hey, Kyle, how you doing, man? Good to see you. Look forward to seeing you in person someday soon again. So with the success of the program and the MMWR, so by the way, getting an MMWR without it being a train wreck is really hard to do. So congratulations to all of you on that. But my question is, how much has all this cost? And I say that because folks, I've had a couple of journalists ask me, well, how have you done it? How much has it cost? What would it look like to do this for the state of North Carolina, for the country, et cetera, et cetera. And I just think, as a university, I think we should really try to wrestle with that and see if we can communicate some information of that sort.
Don, great question. I will tell you the transparent, honest, 100% answer is we don't have firm numbers. I would say it's certainly in the millions. And one of the reasons we certainly have our arms around the cost of the testing issues as working with Tom and those. But that org chart that I showed you, as you push behind those org charts, there are dozens of FTEs in there. And we've pulled from a variety of different places. And that's some of the unique aspects as we've talked to other people around the country. You know, some of the compliance issues that we've had here, I would argue that's what we've made in terms of the difference. So we have had huge discussions with literally dozens of peer institutions across the country. I do think the last comment I would make is, and maybe either Steve or Tom want to say something about this, but I do believe that the CDC is actually intending on using that article as a way of propelling other schools to try to replicate as very close to what we did here over the last couple of months.
Great. Thank you, Kyle, Jennifer, and Mary Pat for presenting this information. And again, thank you for all that you've done all semester long. It's been a great success. It's a good segue into our next guest. Since we started in the fall, I've gotten a number of questions from faculty and others about our testing protocols, who's in the pool, who gets called a test, if people reject the test or don't show up for the test, what happens? So we've invited a couple of colleagues who are directly involved to come and talk to us about our testing protocols. We have Tom Denny and Steve Haas with us, and thank you for coming, and thank you for all that you've done to get our testing up and running and such a great success. I turn it over to you.
Well, thanks, Carrie. See if I can get my screen shared here again. And thanks everybody for inviting us to come and share a few things. I'm going to say a few words about some lessons that we've learned. We publish a lot of data on our dashboard, and the question I get from my own biology faculty most often is, what does that data actually mean? So I want to say a few words about that and then turn it over to Tom to tell you about the testing program itself, and then hopefully have some time for questions. I'm going to start with Patrick's question early on about what we're expecting to see in terms of the number of infections when we start baseline testing in the spring. Modeling team is working right now to try and understand where our students come from and use the county health data from those areas where they're coming from to try and make predictions about what we're going to see for incidence rates when the students come. So hopefully we won't be surprised. And I'm going to just start here, and thanks, Don, for pointing this out. And I will point people to this publication that came out on Tuesday for additional details about the testing program. What I want to highlight here is the author list. And it's huge, and it should be bigger. But the way this mechanism has come together and came together so rapidly, we have a huge integration of faculty from School of Medicine, from Arts and Sciences. We have staff from all units across the university. We have administration all working together as a single unit here. It's a very, very unique mechanism that was put together. And I just want to thank Kyle, whose energy has been unbelievable in leadership to keep that team going. And as well, we've had regular meetings with Vince and Sally, and they've been fully committed to what we're doing and supportive, and none of this could happen without them. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about interpreting the data. And one of the things that came out in this MMWR publication is that Duke was actually quite unique in the approach it took, in that only 6% of universities, I think with around, I can't remember the cutoff for student population, around 5,000, only 6% of those universities were actually doing regular surveillance testing of students. Most of them focused only on symptomatic testing. And what we found as we started to pull the data together over the semester is that if we look at the combination of entry testing, which is mostly asymptomatic, our pooled testing, which is aimed at asymptomatic cases, and the contact tracing that we've done, which identifies people who have been exposed and puts them into quarantine so they're not transmitting within our populations. if you take the combination of things that many universities weren't doing, that accounted for about 73% of the cases that we were able to identify. And I think this is part of the success of the testing program, which also goes together with everything that everybody else has done, student behaviors and adherence to social distancing and masking. All of these things really contributed to the low incidence on campus. I was looking at data last week, and if you look at a number that is not the positivity rate that you hear expressed a lot, which is the number of positives per test, but the actual per capita, the number of new infections per student per week, that per capita incidence was conservatively about half of what we're seeing in the local Durham community. And that's probably a large underestimate, because at the county health level, people are not testing as deeply and as regularly as Duke is. It's mostly that per capita incidence is estimated from a subset of symptomatic testing. So we're probably much lower in our student population, and that includes our off-campus student population, much lower incidence level than we're seeing in the surrounding communities. And so what does that actually mean? Well, so we've spent a lot of time talking about the idea that we're seeing very, very low transmission rates on campus. As Kyle brought up, we're not seeing any evidence for in-class transmission. When people are wearing masks and social distancing, we're not seeing transmission. And this is the message we're getting from the discussions we're having with many of our sister institutions as well. And so this is something that was, I'm sure, a great concern going into the semester. And I'm very happy to report that we're just not seeing it. Another conclusion that one might draw from the data is that, and one of our concerns going in was that our Duke students living off campus might be contributing to transmission in the local community. And the fact that we're not seeing, or that we're actually seeing lower levels of incidence in that student population suggests that they aren't contributing substantially to the spread within the Durham community. All right, a couple lessons learned. Kyle alluded to this earlier. We did have one cluster. It was at an off-campus apartment complex. And the initial case was identified by asymptomatic testing. And our contact tracing team, which has been doing an amazing job, had 8 students immediately into quarantine, and the 7 more students that turned positive were already isolated in quarantine by the time they showed positivity. And so this goes to the idea that the surveillance testing and in concert with contact tracing, we're able to identify this cluster rapidly and isolate the students from the rest of the population so they're not transmitting. So this is a success story, I think, for Duke. And as well, we had a number of small, I would call them subclusters. They were less than 5, associated with various apartment complexes. They were often roommates off campus where we would see transmission. But again, everything that we've been doing with really deep surveillance testing and good contact tracing has limited spread in all of these cases. I already mentioned that we don't see any evidence for in-class transmission. I think that contact tracing group had some evidence that was published that the one place on campus that we might be seeing transmission is at dining establishments. And this has been seen in other organizations, that when the masks come down to eat, then transmission can occur. And we went to, this is one of the reasons we went to takeout only dining on campus near the end of the semester. Just another, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, there's been a real interest in an environment of collaboration that extends beyond the walls of Duke. We've spent a lot of time talking to our colleagues at a number of different schools, and one of my colleagues at Harvard used some of the aggregate data. So this is data that, like you see on the dashboard, to think about new policies for quarantine. Currently, the policies for quarantine are if you're exposed, you go into quarantine for 14 days. There are many folks looking at the data they were collecting for quarantine, not seeing students become positive late in that quarantine, with the idea that maybe we can start to shorten the duration of quarantine. So the data that we've been collecting at Duke went together with data from a number of schools in Boston to try and push for a new policy change and really have data-driven policies that drive what we're doing in terms of quarantine. All right, from there, before I turn it over to Tom, I just want to say something about what we're going to do going forward. A lot of the success we've had in this surveillance testing program comes from super innovative technologies and creativity by Tom Denny and his group in pool testing. You're going to hear about that. And I think going forward, the intent is to continue to focus on innovation. And I want to point out a couple of efforts on campus that are innovating in this space. GCB and the Genome Center are working on a new next-gen sequencing platform for SARS-CoV-2 testing, which may increase our capabilities in terms of testing on campus and beyond. There's a new effort and pilot effort going on in Pratt and Global Health for testing wastewater. And this is something that's happening at a number of universities across the country. And there's going to be some examination of the efficacy of wastewater testing for identification of SARS-CoV-2 cases at Duke. And as well, there's a couple of efforts within the Nicholas School, also the School of Medicine and Global Health, to try and understand better the aerosol transmission of SARS-CoV-2. And then finally, I want to say something about the sharing that's going on in the Ivy Plus consortiums. There is now an effort that began 2 weeks ago to share data, aggregate data from our testing programs with the Ivy schools so that we can all learn from each other. And that's been a really interesting exercise, and trying to share data has its own interesting challenges, but we're going forward with that. And I think that will increase our abilities and our capabilities at Duke to understand how to do what we're doing and do it better. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tom before we take questions to tell you about the pooled testing that everybody's been hearing about. Tom.
Thanks, Steve. And I want to just convey my thanks also to Kerry and the council for the opportunity to present today, and also acknowledge up front that none of this would have been possible without the incredible support of the president, the provost, Tom Trask and Kyle, for all the resources that were made available to make it happen. And then also for me, the dean of the School of Medicine, I needed space to encroach on some friends and some neighbors to rapidly expand. And the School of Medicine came through to help us very quickly. So I'm going to walk you through some of the basics about the testing process. First, what I want you to we're based at the Vaccine Institute. My laboratory has a lot of accreditation. We operate as a CAP and CLIA accredited laboratory. We do a lot of clinical research. So the way that our process works from a day-to-day is consistent with a clinical laboratory operation, even though most of the things that we do are research-based. Next slide, Steve. I need you to, okay. So I come out of about 35 years of working in HIV world, and with HIV, viral load, the amount of virus matters. So early in this pandemic, we started developing a quantitative viral load assay. All of the clinical assays that are used today in clinical laboratories give you a yes or no answer. We thought there would be value with developing an assay that you could quantitate virus. We also were starting to hear early on about shortages of testing reagents and systems. So we developed an assay on a platform of reagents. It's a two-step PCR process that are not typically used in clinical laboratories because most clinical laboratories want to have a fast result. So our results take a little bit longer to develop, but what we learned through this process is we did not have the same supply chain issues that the clinical laboratories were having with testing supplies. And what you will see in this slide here is basically we ran, I don't know if you can see it all at the bottom, but we ran 70 validation panels of different copy numbers of viral standard to show that we had incredible sensitivity down to about 15 copies, 100% at 62 copies for our platform. Next slide. Early on, I just want to, so before we got to pool testing, we developed this assay for supporting clinical research. And we worked with the pediatric group with Matt Kelly, pediatric ID group. We helped characterize a pediatric cohort of children that were HIV infected. This work is in press now at Clinical Infectious Diseases. Next slide. We also have been working with the ICU team led by Brian Kraft. And one of the issues with COVID has been whether or not, is it the virus or is it the host response to virus that causes a lot of the side effects? And in HIV, you know, viral load and viral burden does matter. So we started looking at ICU patients, both their endotracheal aspirates or plasma, to see how much virus was present. And this study has not been published yet, but it's in the process of being put together for publication. And what we were able to show with the ICU team is that those individuals that went on to end organ failure and many who did not survive had those high viral load concentrations in their plasma. Next slide. So now we're going to come to pool testing. So one of the first challenges we had to do was show what is the appropriate pool size to use. And pool testing goes back to the 1990s and the early days of HIV when we faced many of the same challenges we have today, more testing needs and reagents and supplies and laboratories to perform it. So we started looking at, we have two platforms, the one that we developed that was quantitative, and then a clinical platform, the Abbott M2000. And basically we made different pools down to, you can see 200, 150 copies, and we ran them in replicates on each platform. And we essentially showed in the clinical platform, we could use either a pool of 5 or a pool of 10, and down to 100 copy, we would have 100% detection. In our in-house LDT assay that we built, we showed that we could go all the way down to 50 copies and we would get 100% detection in a pool of up to 1 to 20. For our program that we ran this semester, we used a pool of 1 to 5. Next slide. So what is a pool? Well, in this case, we take 5 individual samples. We take an aliquot. So we make our sample collection vials. They're 2 mLs of saline. The student swabs, does the self-administered swab. They put the swab in the vessel. That comes over to us with a barcode. We take 0.2 milliliters from each of the individual vials and we put that into one vial. That becomes the pool. We test that in the system. If there is a positive pool that lights up, we then go back to the original samples from the student that are held in a refrigerator at that point, and then put them in for what we call a deconvolution process or individual sample testing. Next slide. This is how we do it at the volume we need to do. So as I think Kyle mentioned, we're currently doing about 2,200 samples per day, 5 days a week. So samples come over from the test sites to our laboratory. They're all barcoded. We have a robot at the Vaccine Institute that we reposition to support this program. It can take 1,500 samples and convert them into pools of 5 within about 3-hour period. Those samples then come over into my laboratory. We're using a QIAGEN robot assisted PCR process. It is a 2-step PCR process, so it's slower. We do the testing. If there's a negative result, then there no more follow-up. If it is a positive pool, we come back, we deconvolute the pool, and then we partner with our clinical laboratories. So that sample goes over and it's run in the clinical laboratory. A result is then generated, and then from that result that is generated, we have a medically actionable result. It goes back to student health electronically, or it goes back, if it's a faculty or staff member, it goes back to employee health. And then that is what would trigger contact to the individual or contact tracing, all the other appropriate follow-ups that need to be done based on a positive. Next slide. So the important point here is that the pool testing that we're doing, while it is not considered surveillance testing and pool testing is not considered diagnostic in itself, but we are operating in a highly regulated environment, being CAP and being CLIA. We're able to set standards for that process. We're able to assure the custody of the sample that has good quality. We then can take that sample, deconvolute it, send it into the laboratory, and then that is handled in the same way as a symptomatic sample that was coming from student health, employee health, or one of the test centers set up around Durham as part of the health system. So at the end of the day, through either process, we have actionable results. Next slide. How did we scale up? Well, we were able to just order additional equipment, and our platforms that we use for our automated PCR extraction and our automated equipment. So what you can see here, one platform on the top, you would be able to get 320 individual samples in a 12-hour period. We basically have 5 samples running in parallel, 5 platforms running in parallel. We run the laboratory currently at 3 shifts a day, 5 days a week, and with a Saturday day coverage to finish up the late afternoon samples that come in on Friday. We have a total capacity at this point of about 3,200 per day. We've tried to stay below that in what we do because we want to have some redundancy. If we have equipment failure, that we're not out a day of function, we have some backup capacity there. We don't have as much backup capacity as we would love to, but we've been able to get through this semester, I think, with only one weekend that we had some challenges. We were just working instruments too hard. Next slide. Quality control. We do a lot of QC. We have standards that we measure and QC reagents with every run that we do. Typically for PCR-driven viral load type of assays, a half-log variability is considered extremely good and tight. This is some data over 171 runs that we've done. You can see it's clustering very good. What we look for, if we have 2 consecutive or 3 consecutive days of an outlier, then that becomes something that we have to start looking at root cause analysis and say, do we have any issues with reagents? But basically, the point here is that the assay's been performing very good over time. Next slide. So the comprehensive plan, Steve talked about it, the modeling and who selects, who's part of the test pool for the day. You know about the SynMom app that students are notified. That app is used to barcode the sample as it comes into our laboratory. It comes in, it's pooled. We do the testing. If it has to be deconvoluted in clinical testing, that's done. And then that goes off to the student health or employee health for contact tracing. Next slide. Get a lot of questions about sensitivity and specificity. I just want to call your attention to sensitivity and specificity rates here that we've been monitoring this over time. When you do surveillance testing, what you want to have is an assay that is sensitive as you can. So think of it as what we're doing is almost a 2-part process. So you want a very sensitive assay that may pick up and give you some false positives that you then go on and use a confirmatory test, such as we're doing in the clinical testing process to resolve that. So with the system that we've developed, we have, if you will, weighted this to getting any little signal and make sure that we're picking that up and then taking it through the process. And as we go through these day-to-days, there are numbers, and we've talked about setting thresholds of where would you not deconvolute a pool. Well, I can tell you, we've had a pool, if I remember correctly, we had a pool that came up that had 1 copy that we detected on this assay. And under most systems, people would say, throw it away, don't pay attention to that. It's noise. Well, we deconvoluted it, put it through the system. And in fact, that developed a positive individual that then went on to be contact traced and part of the system. So it's our feeling, and I think for the CDC, it reviewed all this, as Don mentioned earlier. You make it through the MMWR process standing, it's a good feeling. And I think they've confirmed that we have a system in place that is meeting the needs of the Duke community. And I think there's some take-home messages. It can be, parts of it can be exported to other groups that may want to try to reproduce. So I think that was my last slide, if I'm not mistaken. So I'd be happy to take any questions on the process, but thank you all. Thank you all for supporting the program and helping to keep the campus safe this semester.
Thank you both for that. Craig Henriquez.
Yeah, hi. I had a question about how many of the positive cases have been identified using the SimMod app.
Independent of testing?
Yeah.
That would, that Kyle, or I would not have that information.
I guess
that would have to come through student health maybe, or other groups.
It's been a relatively small number that has gone through a process like this, where we've had actually someone who's reported symptoms that then we don't go through surveillance testing. We're immediately getting them in for clinical testing. And that's been the smaller number of positives that we've had through the semester.
I think the other point I would mention, I didn't focus on, but it's in the article, MMW article, about 51% of the positives that we picked up in our testing program were truly asymptomatic when they were reached and contact traced. They had zero symptoms.
Thank you.
I'll add to that that's fully consistent for this age cohort with what other studies have been showing. And one of the real important parts about doing surveillance, asymptomatic surveillance testing, is that there's such a high potential for transmission that's asymptomatic.
Great. Thank you both. And I should mention that John Hara in the math department is part of your group as well, who's been one of the principals in this, and want to thank him as well, and everyone who's contributed. Let me just alert council, we want to go over about 10 minutes, because this last item on the agenda is something that's quite important, and it's listed as comments from the chair. And what I want to do my comments will be to recognize Executive Vice President Tallman Trask, who was attending his last academic council meeting as a university officer. I'm sure you all know that Tallman is retiring from Duke at the end of this calendar year after 25 years of service. Tallman, by our calculations, we estimate that this council meeting is roughly your 200th meeting. Tallman has served 3 university presidents in his tenure here at Duke. Nan Cohane, who hired him from the University of Washington in 1995, Richard Broadhead, and now, of course, Vince Price. And he will retire as the longest serving Chief Financial and Administrative Officer in the history of our university. Tallman has been a great partner to the faculty over his time here at the university. One example of that is that when West Union was being renovated, and it was under discussion where the academic council office would be. We'd been there for 30 years in West Union Tower. Tallman was the driving force behind the decision to have the academic council office remain on West Campus. And as you know, this is prime real estate and people go to war over space on West Campus. But Tallman ensured that we had space on West Campus. And if you came to the open house that was held in December of 2018 in the new council offices in Flowers Building, you saw the space, and you know that it's really wonderful space. I sometimes joke with Vince that the view from the chair's office is better than the view from the president's office. Vince, don't get any ideas. We recently signed a long-term lease with Tallman, a 200-year lease for that space. 1 year for each of the meetings he's attended at Academic Council. So it's going to remain Academic Council space, all of you who have your eyes on it. Tallman has been a wonderful partner with the faculty on a number of different fronts. Some of you've heard me say that he's been a champion for the benefits package, the tuition package, and making sure that those who need to understand how that works and the value of those to us and the university. Perhaps what's unique about Tallman among his peers, and that is that Tallman, whenever there's a project that Duke is going to do a building project or a major renovation, Tallman has been guided by this mantra: how will it serve our core academic purpose? He begins with that question and he ends with that question in the planning stages and as things are being done. How will it serve our core academic purpose? Those of you who served on ECAC or UPC over the years know Tallman leads with the academic mission of the university whenever there's a project to be done. Tallman, thank you. Best wishes for whatever is coming next. And now I'm going to call on Don Taylor, a former chair of the Academic Council, to say a few words.
Hey, Tallman, congratulations. Good to see you. I know you and me and Carrie had a lunch scheduled late last March. It got canceled, so we need to bring that back up. I just want to, when I first, about a decade ago, met you, I knew you of reputation. And so I was joining the UPC committee and I was somewhat, I just was uncertain about what I was going to find. And what I found was a leader who, if a faculty member was willing to dig in and try to learn and understand the finances of the university, that you were willing to teach and help and answer questions directly. And so I've always appreciated that. I know with Kyle Kavanaugh and Tim Walsh, they also had that ethic of being very open with the faculty. And I know that in large part came from you. That was your willingness and understanding of wanting the faculty to join with the administration and understanding the finances. And the last thing I would say is Carrie is so right. Tallman, I think, is very unusual, and there are not very many people or faculty that understand the degree to which he takes financial acumen, but an acknowledgement and an understanding that a university is a super weird enterprise. It has to be thought of as a business in some ways, but in other ways, every product line we have loses money. And that's because we're trying to do something that's good for society as a whole. And Tallman, I think, through good times and bad times, always said, here's the money, here's the academic mission, they've got to be put together. And so I really appreciate that. And I would just say peace, blessings, and Godspeed in retirement, Tallman.
President Price.
Well, thank you, Carrie. And on behalf of the administrative leadership team, I want to echo your appreciation of Tallman and second Don's remarks. You know, in a quarter of century of service at Duke, Tallman has transformed the university. In fact, it's hard, maybe impossible, to find a space on our campus where his hand has not shaped our experience at Duke. He is probably the only executive vice president in higher education who's a member of the American Institute of Architects. But his most profound mark has been less on our buildings than on our people. He has, as Don said, he's hired and mentored extraordinary leadership team. He's always kept our academic mission foremost in everything that he's done. And he's been a fabulous partner to me, as he has to two presidents who preceded me, and supports our leadership team, including the provost, the chancellor for health affairs, enormously well. I'll be personally forever grateful for the 3.5 years that we've been working together and for all he's done for our university. So we'll have some other occasions to celebrate Tallman when COVID permits us to be together in person. But again, Tallman, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you. Thank you so very much.
Dr. Trask.
Sorry, I was muted. I thank you all very much for those comments. It's been a magical 25 years for me. As I said to someone before, Nan called me up out of the blue. If you'd asked me where was Duke, I couldn't have told you. And I took a gamble, and I'm forever grateful that I did. It's a wonderful place, and primarily because of its people. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tolman. Before we adjourn, let me announce the vote. The policy changes passed with just 2 abstentions. So that we'll do that. But Tolman, thank you, good luck. And I want to be on that invitation list or whatever the celebration is when we are able to gather and have it. So with the council, before we adjourn, join me in giving Tolman a round of applause of gratitude. Thank you so much, Tolman. And with that, we are adjourned until July. I'm looking forward to being adjourned until January 21st. We return. Have a safe break, a safe holiday period. Enjoy Thanksgiving in small numbers, very small numbers, and enjoy the rest of the holidays to come. And get some rest, please. Everyone, Kyle, get some sleep, unplug, and everyone, please get some rest and come back safely and rested in January. See you in January.
Bye.
Bye.